Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mordred's Community Multiplayer, Anbennar Edition, Political Chat. Joined as always by the Martian. Martian, how's it going?
Going good?
So, as we do, we'll take a look. Great powers of the world. Congrats, number one great power currently.
Yeah, yeah.
Any surprises here for you?
I think this is all about what you'd expect. It's good to see that City Razor is keeping up, but I think a big notable thing that we don't have on here is we don't have any of the dwarves yet, as well as Gawed. So it's certainly interesting to see those not on the list.
I am a little surprised that none of the dwarves have popped up yet. Maybe we'll see that come next week's video. Players just off of the Great Power list right now looks like Gawed, Alnavir, Verkerguland, and the Overclan. But besides the Overclan, the other three are quite a bit below the Great Power list. And the other thing that surprises me, or that I did not expect going into this multiplayer, is our two adventurers from Eskin. The Small Fellows, or Newshire, and Castellier. Um, both on the Great Power list, both pretty significant powers in their regions. Um, I did not predict that going into this multiplayer.
Yeah, it's certainly cool to see, and also a really crazy thing is for the large majority of this past session, Great Powers like 4 through 8 were all within about 50 dev of each other. So it stayed very competitive as far as who gets to be on this list.
Yeah, there's still 1 through 4 have created a bit of a gap for themselves, but 5 through 8 still within 100 dev of each other. It's a little tricky based on subject development, etc., but from the Great Power score perspective, yeah, within 100 dev. So, most action this past session obviously took place in the Serpent Spine. We had Natvir, Verkelgulen, Odval Kazand, and Orlam Dahir versus, oh my god, these names. Sainavar and Odval Ludholm in the First War. Any reaction to how that war went down, or did it go as you expected?
There were things about it that were expected, and there were things about it that really surprised me. I talked to several of the players involved in this just to kind of get their perspectives, and one thing that surprises me a lot is the tension between the dwarves now. While, they united to kind of deal with Saranvar and get them kicked out, and Saranvar did a great job fighting the war, but between them having to fight all of the dwarves and the City Razor Condot, it was tall order that is not really going to happen. But surprisingly enough, the dwarves have immediately turned on each other, and there's lots of talk between them that sounds like we might see war between them even in this next session.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, right after that war, we had Natvir and City Razor appear to align themselves in what may be the strongest pair of countries from an alliance perspective. And it looks like they may be dividing up the Ram Dwarves. Um, Anything you think can be done to save the Ram Dwarves at this point?
I mean, you could try and appeal to Bjarnik or the Jad Empire, but even then, both of them are somewhat removed from the situation, don't have a reason to help, and also have bigger things to deal with in their own nations. And so, there's not really anyone who has a good reason to save them at this point.
And it's interesting. Northern Pass obviously went over to City Razor. The Ram Dwarves lost a number of provinces here, giving City Razor the border with Bjarnik. Do you think that City Razor, I don't want to be too critical here, but missed an opportunity to move more forcefully into the east by helping against the Wood Elves in that war? Right now, City Razor manpower reserves relatively low, Bjarnik relatively high. Diplomatically, Bjarnik and Gowid combined have a larger manpower pool than City Razor, and City Razor would be forced to fight on disadvantaged terrain if they come in now. Do you did you expect City Razor to move more aggressively into the east this past session? Or west,
I
sorry.
I could see them moving west, and without the other considerations of the session, that's what I would naturally expect. But with the dwarves fighting, I'm very surprised they didn't instead go towards Spider Wretch. Because you go through that small AI, easy to full annex them, and then you're in the Serpent Spine. And he talks so much about how he wants to get to the Wood Elves. Well, once you do that, you only have to take 6 provinces to already be bordering the forest. And so I find it really surprising that that wasn't the route he went, and taking a moment to kind of exploit the weakness of the dwarves and get towards what I think is another good end-game goal of getting into the forest. So it's a little weird, and it feels pretty counterproductive to the RP scene from City Razor in the past.
So, in City Razor's defense, from an RP perspective, their mission tree with their formable only gives them one path into the Wood Elves, um, and it's through the Harpies from a claims perspective. So that may be why he did not step into the Serpent Spine, given his lack of claims on the region. But
That's
he
true.
does have claims on Bjarnik as well as Castellir through his formable. He just,
Yeah.
for some reason, when we look at it regionally, he gets claims on Inner Castanor, the Northern Pass, West Castanor. He does not get South Castanor. So entry into the Deep Woods has to come through the Harpy Hills via his mission tree. Um, or he
Yep.
can obviously wait a little bit for Imperialism CB and then he'll be in.
Yeah. It's just interesting, and especially him helping the dwarves. That's I certainly didn't expect. Neutrality, I think, was the most obvious, but it's interesting in the fact that it does give him a very strong alliance moving forward.
Yep. And then as we look at the far east, we have Fizz, Odval, Khanzad making progress towards the command. Um, Economically, quite a powerhouse here. A 4-3-6 with strict 5-5-4 advisors. So expect him to continue to move up the charts from a development perspective. Do you think the command will be out of the mountains by the end of next session?
I think they might be. I think Fizz is in a unique situation, and that really he can take time. He doesn't have to really rush it. He can take these wars slowly, but obviously, manpower's up, got armies built, you're got plenty of money. I think you're definitely going to see him at least start fighting the command. He might not be super slow to take all of it per se, but I think it's definitely, easily going to be his.
And then as we shift to Verkal Gulin, obviously joined Ernat Veer, and then I don't know the exact deals. Verkal Gulin felt that they were promised this whole Jorkod in exchange for their help against the Wood Elves. Ernat Veer used the help and their position of strength following that war to take it for themselves. Verkal Gulin seems to be positioning themselves in opposition to Ernat Veer. Do you expect more dwarf on dwarf warfare, or do you think we may see a little bit of a cold war here?
I think a lot of it hinges on the City Razor as well as the Jad Empire. Obviously, if City Razor is actually, meaning to defend Aeronat Veer, which I don't see any reason why they wouldn't, then Verkal Gulin's in a spot where they really can't attack into it, right? They're just not strong enough. Now, obviously, if they get the Jad Empire to join, then I think you're going to see a slug out happen very, very quickly. But with that alliance, it slows things down a good bit. But also, I think Duel in Oddval Ludham actually poses a lot more interest than most people might see due to the undead army. So I don't think they're going to sit on the sidelines of this either. And so I think they'll all find a way to attack each other. It just might take them a little bit to figure it out.
And then we touched briefly, Jad Empire now is formed. Jadari are no more. A bit
Congrats.
of expansion from the Jad, a little bit into Raheen, a decent chunk out of the Overclan, securing some more defensible terrain in future possibilities of war. obviously number 2 on the great power list, number 1 from a manpower reserve perspective, number 1 from an eco perspective as of right now. Um, how aggressive do you think the Jad Empire is going to be moving forward?
I mean, just knowing, the player, knowing the situation, knowing that this is our first time getting to play in the setting of Anbennar, I don't think they're going to go that crazy. I mean, I was a little surprised to see because there was some blue flames this session from the Jad, um, but I don't think they're going to be super aggressive to push into other nations, just because it kind of ruins the fun in lots of ways. Because right now, any individual player they could pretty handedly beat. Most combinations of players they could handedly beat. So it's a lot more fun, for them to get to sit back and kind of let everyone else grow up, and then get to have more fun fights later, rather than just curb stomping now.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. Maybe a period of inward reflection for the Jad. Something some people may have not noticed. Um, I randomly was assigned the trait Powerful Mage, so my the tick over happened a couple years in where I got my first attribute or first bonus, and it was Powerful Mage. So I've been playing around with Magic a little bit. Haven't done much in single player with Magic, but testing it out now. So the Jad may be turning inwards while we look to study the mysteries of the supernatural.
And not to mention that 5/5/4 powerful mage will last until the end of the game if not killed by an event or being a general. So exceptionally strong ruler there.
Yep. Speaking of strong rulers, something that's been pretty interesting. Verkil Gulen has managed to have. Obviously, he does not start as a 666, but you get events to increase his age. Now has a 666. Odval Lud or Odval Khanzad has a really strong ruler. Ernot Veer with a 446. Oh, I believe he had a stronger ruler previously. Yeah, this is a relatively new ruler. And then, oh, where'd your good ruler go?
Well, he dies, but I will be getting a very good ruler by quickly into the next session. So.
Okay, because I believe through event you get a 666 elf that's
Yes.
21, right?
Yes.
So the mana generation in this mod is it's interesting. It seems a little bit out of whack, but we'll see what impact that has as we progress from the mid game to the late game.
And I will say, you notice it quite in a quite stark contrast when you look at a nation like the Gnomish hierarchy, where you have these low roll rulers where it kind of doesn't matter how well you play, as long as you have a 1/1/4 ruler, you're not going to keep up with anyone else, tech wise, just because the averages are so high.
Yeah, it's been tough. They're still a little bit behind on ideas, pretty far behind on tech. Hopefully they can make some changes and catch up quickly. Obviously, their government type, I think, lends them nicely to that. Technology cost minus 25%, so certainly not out of contention, but we'll see how quickly they're able to pivot. Shifting now, we've got an ongoing war. The Wood Elves expansion was cut off by a combination of New Shire and Aquitbar Overclan. They went on the offensive against the Overclan with their ally Odval Ludholm. This war is ongoing and it's quite bloody. Odval is in a tiny bit of debt. The Wood Elves are in a little bit of debt. Overclan is in significant debt, but has secured the show superiority 25 war score through winning battles, and even if they are fully sieged down, because they have that 25% and some islands that the Wood Elves will not be able to take, the worst peace deal they could get forced out of the war for is going to be roughly 30%. How do you see this war wrapping up?
Hey, I can't help but see this war and think that it's kind of misguided from the Overclan's perspective, because just because of the fact that you can delete all of your armies and be fully occupied and make point 0.1 ducats at the end of the day, doesn't mean you ever should do that. And I understand the urge to try and not lose the war, not lose land, but when you suicide your nation over it, it's crippling, right? I mean, because obviously it'll take a huge prestige hit, which it's already negative. War exhaustion's already at 9. You got plenty to go. Not to mention the fact that all really Cybervar has to do is let rebels spawn, and then your nation will shatter, and you will be able to do nothing to stop it, and it was all over you not wanting to take a peace deal. So it seems very odd to me that he would try and hold out in this for as long as he is. And obviously, he's not out yet, right? He's got a lot of troops still in the dwarves, inside the mountains there. But if he goes the route that it's sounding like he wants to go, I don't think this will end well for him.
It's going to be an interesting one to watch. And I think there's a lot of folks watching it. New Shire in particular may put their finger on a scale one way or the other. The obvious expansion into either the Wood Elves or into some of this land that the Overclan holds. From a trade node perspective, New Shire's trade can leak pretty heavily into the flooded coast. Um, Obviously, they'd probably like to catch it here, so full control of this trade node as well as the marches, and they have the ability to catch a lot of trade. Um, the deep woods obviously flows into the flooded coast, so economically, I think there's a lot at stake for the New Shire to pick the
Certainly.
right horse here. Shifting north, Gowid finally broke into the Empire this session, took down a very valuable city here in Vertesk from a trade perspective as well as uh, Aramar. So now they have two centers of trade in uh, one of the only, I think there's two end trade nodes, this one and one in the Serpent Spine. 90 ducats here. Uh, Gowid obviously 16%, and they can increase that as they build up a navy and upgrade these centers of trade. Do you think we're going to see a resurgence of Gowid here, or is it too little too late?
There's a lot of ways it could go. I think they still need some help. Obviously, tech-wise, they're still behind, but they've kept up a mill tech, and that's obviously the most critical thing in their position to still be able to fight, still keep an army. Um, the disaster they're going through right now is a relatively simple one. It's not, I mean, super crippling, especially as far as this mod standards go for disasters. It's basically nothing. And so they're in a really good spot. It's obviously not great, but compared to the previous sessions and missing out, it's really looking quite good. It's just the question of how long they can keep this kind of peace with Laurent. If they go into that war too early, then it could spell the end of the game for them. But the longer they wait, the more of a chance they have to actually be able to topple Laurent.
Yeah, and shifting to Laurent, obviously Mordred not following the meta strictly from an idea choice perspective, but from an economic perspective, 130, uh, top 4 on the Great Power list, still has a very large vassal swarm. So you look at his army, his manpower, and then you add on Rubyhold dwarves, 27. You look at the Red Glades elves, 16. Um, Duran, and then I think Gowit's still in significant trouble here. I think a lot of it's going to hinge on how strong their alliances with Bjarnik and Demaria truly are.
Yeah. And it's also, Laurent, it's worth noting that they're playing very well as far as sending officers to these marches with great militaries. He's also making sure to prioritize them on sieging and defending based off of what works best for those races, such as the Red Glades, having them on a more supportive role since they don't have as much manpower, right? And he's, even though it might seem a little weird from an ideas perspective, he's still building an incredibly strong nation. It's quite a lot to deal with.
Yeah, 40% Cav combat ability at this point in the game. Another interesting wrinkle associated with this mod is um, mage leaders, mage generals. By having a vassal swarm, you drastically increase the chance that you'll have a mage general in one of your vassals to fight alongside you. Those siege pips can be incredibly helpful, and the shock pips as well, especially at this point in the game.
Yeah. Although the one advantage that Gawa does get, and it's a small one, is the exploration ideas for Laurent. Obviously, having to maintain colonies, having to be stretched out within her, might present more opportunities for Gawa than they would normally get to see. So,
And then Bjarnik, right up there on the great power list, just outside the top four. Quite a bit of manpower, a strong colonial presence here in the north, a decent amount of claims left to act upon, but the majority of them come through Gawed or Gawed. Is this alliance going to eventually break down, like we saw the Dwarven one deteriorate, like we've seen some of the ones in the Empire deteriorate?
it's really hard to tell. I'm surprised it ever existed in the first place, and the fact that that comes so much out of left field makes me think that there might be something more to it than meets the eye, right? There might be some motivations behind the scenes that more explain this, and make it actually make sense. As of now, it's just kind of weird, but who knows?
And then we'll spend a minute in the Empire itself. We caught some flack by leaving Isterlore out of our top three in our last video. Obviously, Red wasn't here this week. West Dam, now Demaria, seized on that opportunity, has strengthened their position here, making the tag switch, but the right-hand side of the Empire, tremendous economic wealth coming out of our good friend Conwell. 112 on a 11 province. I can't even call it an 11 province minor, but just an absolute powerhouse from an economic perspective here. 444s, tremendous monarch point generation. And then our friends in the south, Bulasar and Vern, struggling a little bit, planning to make exoduses to the New World. What's next for the Empire? Is Istrelor going to become resurgent? I know Conwell and Istrelor had good relations, remain allied, but Conwell's also now allied with Demaria. Do Demaria and Istrelor make peace? Obviously, they have quite conflicting mission trees, but they may be able to find a way to work together. What do you think is going to happen with the Empire in this next session?
It's really interesting in that we've had this whole empire balance between Wisdom and Istrelor, getting to watch them duke it out. Many of the wars have been centered on those two and supremacy within the Dame Sphere, and we've seen who won that now, right? And moving on here, Istrelor is no longer the top dog. There's not a weak nation by any means, but Conwell and Telgier are both incredibly strong. They've both done a great job at staying on the cutting edge of tech the whole game. Obviously, we just talked about the crazy economy from Conwell. Absolutely mental amount of money for as small of a nation as they are, especially considering how not a whole lot of it's from trade. Naturally, you'd assume, seeing that kind of income, that you'd have like 80% trade or something, but it's only 40% of their income. And so I think that says a lot as to how strong Conwell is. And so I think it comes down to which one of them two want to step up and take leadership of this side of the Empire. Either one of them can do it. It's just a question of how well they play their game diplomatically from here on out.
Yeah, looking at it from a dev perspective, they have a couple of paper provinces, a couple of cloth provinces. Average development of their provinces has got to be, yeah, it's north of 30. At this point in the game, that's just absolutely mental.
Yeah, certainly.
And now we'll shift a little bit. The New World, quite a hodgepodge of colonial nations, but obviously dominated by Vinal. They have left their island behind. They are the number one great power. They have sent colonists back to reclaim it so that they do have the ability to play in Castanor moving forward, but how long do you think it's going to take Vinal before they re-emerge on the, we'll call it the world stage?
I think Vinal's obviously going to be quiet, right? I mean, there's no reason to try and go back, and try and stir up trouble in Canor. There's still plenty of consolidation to be done, not to mention a lot more colonizing to be done that might meet the eye. as well as lots of weird stray colonies, borders that need to be cleaned up, and no real incentive, rush, or RP reason to go back to Kenor. It's going to be a long time.
Anything we missed? Anything you'd like to touch on as we approach session number 4?
Uh, Not really. I think we've had a really interesting session. I think obviously lots of power dynamics got shook up. We've seen great power lists change surprisingly, um, and we're in a good position to move forward here. Some players I think are going to be dying in this next session, which unfortunate, but it happens. We've seen some reseeds that didn't go so well, some reseeds that went better. Um, but it's a lot of mystery moving forward, because obviously so many of these dynamics that we had going got broken. All these these players that were very strong now don't look so strong, and so there's a lot of questions moving forward. It'll be interesting to see how players answer those questions.
And obviously, we have some ongoing Blue Flames leading us into next week. What do you predict for the next set of Blue Flames outside the existing ones?
I think I think we're probably going to see some more things happening in the colonies, especially with the southern continent, as far as making this one shade of red instead of 3 or 4. And as well as I feel like Laurent, it got a nice quiet session, and I feel like they're probably ready to stir up some of their own trouble now.
Yeah, I agree. I think Laurent may be on Blue Flames at some point this coming week. I'm gonna also Demaria. Um, I just have a
Certainly.
feeling that they're not done. Obviously, claims all over Istralor, claims all over Pearl's Edge. Istralor will be getting save edits, obviously, due to the AI, but Demaria and Gawed may be too much for Istralor and Conwell, if that's the side Conwell decides to fall on to contend with. But Demaria would be my bet for Blue Flames.
Yeah.
Well, appreciate you taking time, and look forward to speaking next week.
See you.